A German Sturmgeschütz self-propelled gun is rolling straight towards the British soldiers. In a fight against infantry, the tank would usually be the favourite, but not today, because today the tank is facing Major Robert Cain, and if there's one thing Major Cain doesn't like, it's German tanks. And to make matters worse, Cain's already angry. He's supposed to be in Arnhem as part of Operation Market Garden, but fierce fighting with SS Panzer Grenadiers has meant he's had to fall back with his men to the town of Oosterbeek. In the process, he's led a bayonet charge, lost all of his officers and most of his men. Robert Cain wants revenge. In his slit trench, Cain waits until the tank is just 20 yards away. He aims his PIAT anti-tank gun and fires. The shot was good, and the round explodes directly under the tank, but annoyingly it causes absolutely no damage whatsoever. Cain reloads the PIAT, takes aim and fires, but again the round causes no damage at all. Meanwhile, all of the commotion has made the German tank commander a bit cross. He orders his machine gunners to open fire, and he takes revenge with a shell from the 7.5cm gun. Cain is hit by a machine gun bullet just before the tank's shell destroys a building, and he's showered with falling rubble. Convinced he's been killed, Cain's men can't believe their eyes when the smoke clears to reveal their commanding officer in the open ground pointing his PIAT at the German tank. He takes the shot, and finally the PIAT bomb disables the tank. But Cain doesn't have time to celebrate because a second Sturmgeschütz has now appeared. The Major reloads, takes aim and pulls the trigger, but this time his PIAT misfires and the round detonates in his face. Dazed and unable to see, in his own words, Cain shouts orders like a hooligan whilst his men drag him reluctantly to the aid station. Thankfully, within half an hour the Major's sight had fully returned. Medics try to give Cain some morphine, but he refuses and decides that he isn't wounded anywhere near enough to stay in the aid station, and he limps back to the front line. At this point, we should probably remember that Cain was a major, and he was the company commander. He's supposed to be writing reports or drinking brandy at the officers' club, not single-handedly destroying every tank in the German army. Cain and his men had landed in Holland with enough supplies for just 3 days. By day 7, things were so bad, a ceasefire was arranged to evacuate the wounded men. Cain had fired so many rounds he'd perforated his eardrum, he'd been shot, blinded and peppered with shrapnel. He could easily have called it a day and left with the wounded soldiers. But Major Robert Cain was a real leader, and he chose to stay with his men. When the fighting recommenced, Cain sees a German Tiger tank. Not one to miss an opportunity, he finds a 6-pounder anti-tank gun and opens fire. A few shots later, he's added another German tank to his scoreboard. He keeps shooting the 6-pounder until he's fired so many rounds the gun's recoil mechanism breaks. The next day, possibly because they were annoyed about losing so many tanks, the Germans launched their biggest assault on Oosterbeek. They threw infantry, flamethrowers and tanks at the British. That gave Cain a problem, because by now he'd used up every single PIAT round in the entire battalion. But people like Major Cain don't let such trivial issues get in the way. Mortars are usually fired from a fixed position on the ground by a squad of 2 to 3 men, but Cain didn't have time for that. He picks up a mortar tube and starts marching towards the Germans, firing his mortar from the hip like a 1940s Rambo. The sight clearly spooked the Germans. Cain's Victoria Cross citation states that Major Cain was everywhere danger threatened. He refused rest and medical attention. He completely demoralised the enemy, who, after an engagement lasting more than 3 hours, withdrew in disorder. That night, Cain and his men withdrew across the Rhine. Cain had destroyed 6 enemy tanks. His leadership and bravery had been exemplary, and he became the only survivor of the Battle of Arnhem to receive the nation's highest award, the Victoria Cross. If you enjoyed the video, please do hit the like button, drop a comment below, it really does help us out, and subscribe to the channel for more animated war stories.